We all are in some ways. But now, they don't want to involve you, but you know the person involved here too, Bud. Do you have anything to say to add to what Dr. Jacobs says?
Clinton would say it depends upon what the word "no" is. I don't know this person, and because this person does not live in the United States, and I've never met her, but I was a recipient, more or less out of the blue, years ago, of a gigantic box from her. She was sending me data about her life, and I would say that this box was almost 3 feet by a foot and a half or something like that by a foot. This is huge. And I looked through the material, and she had recorded every single change in temperature of her body and menstrual periods and all kinds of data about her life and issues physically. So there was such a vast amount that I felt there's something that I didn't want to get involved with, that this was a very needy person, and I wasn't sure of this person's mental stability and so on, or emotional stability, I should put it. And so I didn't get involved with it, but I did look through the material she sent originally. It was all sent back to her. She wanted everything shredded or something, if I remember, but I simply am aware that this is not a typical kind of abductee. This is a very obsessed person about their own experiences, whatever they actually are.
Okay. That's where it goes, ladies and gentlemen. I know there are going to be a lot of questions about this later, but David Jacobs says he will have something on his website about it, and let's move on. Let's move on to the topic of UFO abductions, how they're done, what we have learned from them. Now, I don't know who wants to take this, but feel free to chime in wherever we go. Now, over the years, obviously, the nature of abduction research has, in and of itself, been the source of some degree of discussion, controversy, whatever. And I know you, Kevin Randall, have had concerns, and maybe we should voice those concerns and kind of bring them out into the open and try to explain why things are done the same way or different ways. So, Kevin, what are your concerns?
We have abduction research going back into the 1960s. We have Betty and Marnie Hill, of course. We've had lesser amounts in the 70s, and, of course, it all kind of exploded in the 80s and the 90s. But it seems to me that the abduction research hasn't changed at all. We haven't learned anything from the research that we've been conducting. We haven't formulated new questions. We haven't tried to validate some of the research that has been done. We're doing basic case studies, and that's all we've done in the last, since almost from the beginning. And I would like to see it progress into other areas, other arenas, so that we could learn something more about it. There were questions when Russ Estes, Bill Cohn, and I did our work in the 1990s in our book, that questions weren't being asked, and things that were coming up, what we considered anomalies in the statistical analysis. And we thought that if we explored some of those, our blood types, are some blood types more prevalent in the abduction phenomena than they are represented in the population? Are more college-educated people represented than high school-educated people? All sorts of questions, statistical questions about the nature of the abductee might tell us something about what's going on. And that when some solutions have been suggested for part, and I stress that part of the abduction phenomena, sleep paralysis, for example, and I know that when it's brought up in the UFO community, and not necessarily with Bud or David Jacobs, it's just that, well, some people are awake when they are abducted. And my response is, yeah, there's a phenomenon known as cataplexy, which is basically sleep paralysis when you're wide awake, but it's always associated with narcolepsy. So the question becomes, are there narcoleptics more prevalent in the abductee population than in the general population? No one has bothered to research that question, and that might provide us with a little bit of an answer, not necessarily the whole thing. So we look at all of those sorts of things that can be done and really haven't been done from the very beginning. I was talking to Kathleen Morgan, who is, of course, the niece of Betty Hill, and I mentioned that the symptoms of sleep paralysis mirror the symptoms of alien abduction. and nobody has really come up with a way of separating those two populations. And Kathleen Martin said that some of the preliminary research that she had done suggested that the abductions are described in color and sleep paralysis is described in black and white. Now, I haven't been able to validate this yet. I haven't had a chance to validate it. But if that is true, then we found a discriminating factor between sleep paralysis and alien abduction. And I think that's an important area of research to follow. But we don't seem to follow up on those questions as readily as we should. And I understand it's a question of financing and time and research facilities that sort of inhibit what we want to do in abduction research. But that's sort of where I'm coming from on some of this.
Bud, you want to respond to that?
First of all, part of the problem is the problem of triage. People are coming with their experiences which have been to them, let's say, very traumatic, and they're feeling, quite a lot of them are feeling the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. The issues that Kevin Randall's been talking about, that he are really focused on exploring qualities or aspects of the abductee rather than anything about the experience itself or the physical evidence associating it, other witnesses connected with the sighting, which, of course, is something that is much more important to me because it builds the case that these things are actual physical events that really happen in the real world. Now, I have looked into a few things, such as blood types, and have found no real patterns there whatsoever. I've never heard anybody report that they were suffering from narcolepsy. It's the kind of thing I suppose one could ask, but narcolepsy is fairly rare. Now, the sleep paralysis issue that he mentioned is, of course, really a non-starter in the abduction field simply because such a vast number of abductions take place in daylight with people involved, even witnesses in a few cases, but people are driving in the car with 6 other people and they all are recalling the same kind of experience. There's the nature of, if you look back to the Hill case and some of the early classics, Travis Walton and the Pascagoula case, all 3 of those involve 2 or more people, and everybody is wide awake. So you can't really bring a theory into this that doesn't even begin to match the data in the majority of the cases. So I understand it can be a problem, but what happens, I remember, is in one case I was dealing with someone who said it was sleep paralysis, and what happened was the people they were children, and at the time of this happened, they were adults telling me about it. And they were floated out of a window, apparently. They didn't remember that consciously, but the conscious fact was that they were found on the ground away from 3 stories down, one lying atop another, and they seemed to be in a sort of catatonic state. They couldn't speak, and were taken to a hospital and checked out to see what had happened to them, or doctor's office, and they were physically okay. But the idea that it took them perhaps a half an hour to 45 minutes to sort of come out of the state they were in, it's very hard to call something like that sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is almost inevitably a very brief experience, and these abductions are not. But I think we've got to focus on the experience itself rather than concentrating on, shall we say, the victim.
But you see, when you say sleep paralysis is a non-starter, you're rejecting that idea out of hand. And sleep paralysis may fit some of the cases and eliminate them from the data pool. So I'm not suggesting sleep paralysis explains every case of alien abduction. What I'm suggesting is that some cases may be sleep paralysis, and it's just like areas of the UFO phenomenon in general, that one explanation doesn't explain all aspects of it. If I see a bright light in the sky, at night, it might be a meteor. It might not be. It might be something else. It might be an airplane with a landing light on. So you can't say, well, meteors explain all these cases because they were bright lights in the night sky. And I'm suggesting that sleep paralysis is something that may explain some of the cases. And when I suggest we look at the history of the abductee, that comes out from other abnormalities in the statistical data. Mark Rodiker, the Center for UFO Studies, told me in a preliminary study he had done that it seemed that left-handed people were overrepresented in the abductee population.
I'm in trouble. I'm a lefty. My wife's a lefty.
So am I.
And so is President Obama. Is he an abductee?
Well, there's the problem. I'm trying to be serious about a subject and explain that we have an abnormality in an abductee population examined by Dr. Rodiker, suggesting there are more left-handed people than are normal in the population. It might tell us something. It might not tell us something.
Okay, well, that's the point. You know, we're being silly about it, Kevin, but I understand the seriousness of this, what differs in terms of a left-handed person versus a right-handed person, etc.
I don't know if there's any significance to it at all. I'm merely suggesting that there may be something in the statistical analysis that might explain something about a portion of the population and provide us with some useful data. It may not.
Well, Kevin, one problem you're talking about here involves the source of the data. Now, I don't know where Rodiker got his material, because I think it's, as far as I know, the question whether somebody's a right-handed person or left-handed amongst the abductees when I'm interviewing them, or I think when other people are interviewing them, that's not a question anybody really seems to ask or pay attention to. So I just wonder, if I've worked with, 700 or 800 people, and I never asked the question, but 700 or 800 people, had I asked a question and had we gotten a left-handed bias in the figures, that would be significant. But I wonder how large a pool that Mark is dealing with. I'm not questioning his research abilities, but just the data pools are kind of hard to come by.
Hi, this is Tamar from Namecheap. We're a domain name and web hosting company, and we really care about our customers. With domain name purchases, Namecheap offers free SSL and free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers. We won't bother you with unwanted messaging in your inbox or upon checkout, but most importantly, we care about you, our customers. Your satisfaction and happiness is our primary focus because your support means so much to us. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at radio.namecheap.com for web hosting and domain name specials. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Namecheap, where we host many great contests, or become a fan of ours on Facebook at facebook.com/Namecheap. See you online.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
As you know, the Paracast is brought to you by Audible.com, the Internet's leading provider of audiobooks, with more than 60,000 downloadable titles across all types of literature, and featuring audio versions of many New York Times bestsellers. For listeners of the Paracast, Audio is offering a free audiobook to give you a chance to try out their service. One book to consider, for example, is Above Top Secret, the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up by Timothy Good. Timothy Good, as you know, has been a guest on the Paracast. For this book or another free audiobook of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/Paracast. That's audiblepodcast.com/Paracast.
This is Leslie Kane, and I'm with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, and you are listening to the Paracast.
We have Christopher O'Brien as our special guest host. This is an ultimate abduction roundtable featuring Dr. David Jacobs, Kevin Randall, Bud Hopkins. Kevin, you had a response.
I was just going to say that I believe that the Dr. Rodiker's pool of subjects was relatively small, and I'm not sure that it would translate into the entire abductee population. I'm merely suggesting that there are some areas of research, and I understand what Bud was saying about the traumatic aspect of this in some cases, and that you need to deal with that, as opposed to asking what would be general research questions in an attempt to gather the data. I understand all of that. I'm merely suggesting that there's maybe areas in which we could search that might tell us a little bit about the abductee population. It might tell us a little about the abduction phenomenon on a whole. To reject information out of hand because we don't understand the significance of it seems to me not to be the direction we want to go. We want to understand what is going on out here. And is it a real physical phenomenon? Is it something that is imaginary? Is it something that's created in the research laboratories? We need to answer all of those questions. And I understand that there are cases, many cases, where there's multiple witnesses and there's multiple abductions. There's also, I know, one case very well, and Bud even mentioned this in his first book, the Pat Roach case from Utah, right, which I am now absolutely convinced is a case of sleep paralysis, given the research that I did on the case originally and what I understand about it. Does that mean that all abduction cases fall into that category? Absolutely not, but it's a partial answer.
Well, one quick thing I'd like to say is there's this question of triage involved in what I do. I do not get involved with people who are having, let's say, a very happy, successful life in all departments, and who seem to be suffering from no kinds of traumatic after effects, and who really just are looking into this for the matter of curiosity. So if I'm working with people essentially who feel some sort of damage from what they've gone through, which is the population that's the largest percentage of the population, I think, and the one I pay most attention to, it's very, very hard to start asking those people questions about whether they're right-handed or left-handed and so forth, simply because they feel, almost without exception, they feel that somehow or other there's something the matter with them because they had these experiences, that they have been laughed at and rejected and had problems with their parents telling them that you just have a vivid imagination or whatnot. So therefore, they're not people who are willing to sit around and do questionnaires because of the fact that they feel that's just another way in which they are being judged. So one has to be extremely careful and sensitive working with these people, not to make the victim, so to speak, feel somehow that he or she is being victimized even more.
Well, I'd like your role as a therapist as opposed to a researcher?
I think that in working with abductees, the two roles are so intertwined. But I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to ask Dave Jacobs if his feeling is that one has to be very cautious about the questioning of those sort of non-UFO experience types.
I think it would be handy to know whether people are left-handed or right-handed, and my sense is that it would make no difference, and there wouldn't be any difference in the general population. And the same thing with blood types and all the rest of that stuff. When people come to me, they fill out a questionnaire first, and if they're having experiences that appear to be sleep experiences, I just don't see them. I mean, I'm not interested in spending a lot of time showing how a person is asleep and then.
If I may just interrupt a second, David. Now, when you evaluate this, do you submit this to somebody who has training in psychotherapy or something to look over cases that may involve other issues?
No, what I do is they write me a letter. I'll sometimes get back to them. I've had thousands of people writing me, obviously, over the years. I can't answer everybody. And for people who live around me, and if I'm free and if my schedule fits, I will ask them to fill out the questionnaire. And at that point, I can make a pretty good determination as to whether they've had the kinds of experiences that abductees have had before they know that they're abductees. or not. I then talk with them. I then have them do other tests for me. That is to say, read a short piece about the pros and the cons of going forward with this. I talk with them more. We go over their questionnaire. By the time they enter into my home office, I've talked with them for a considerable length of time. And if there are psychological problems, I tell them right away that their situation is beyond my area of expertise. And unfortunately, every once in a while, someone will slip through. It's been rare, I must say. The majority of the people that I work with are normal individuals. They have no serious problems. Some people I still see after 20 years. They're responsible adults. They're in positions of authority. I've worked with people who have PhDs and MDs and who are attorneys, and people who are high school teachers and college professors, and people who dropped out in the 9th grade and who could never hold a job properly, and everybody in between. I haven't worked with that many people. I've only worked with about 150, but I do a fairly long series of sessions with them, and I'll see them for as long as they want. In other words, I take them on, so to speak, and I can see them for years if they want. I have not noticed any significant difference between them and the normal population. What I've noticed is that they just mirror the population, and it really is sort of the good, the bad, the ugly in a sense, and it's anybody and everything. And I've also noticed that it cuts across all religions and ethnic lines and racial lines and economic lines, educational lines, and geographic lines, and everything else. And both Bud and I have worked with people from other countries, and they all say the same thing. It's sort of a remarkable phenomenon. And one last point, the majority of cases that I've looked at, the majority of events that I've looked at, take place during the daytime when a person is not asleep. I've never had anybody who's had narcolepsy that I know of, and or any sort of sleep problems along those lines where there's obviously a brain dysfunction of some sort. I think I'm working with a population that basically is a normal population for the society.
Well, one thing that I wanted to mention, listening to Kevin's observation, is that, I think an area that has not really been addressed in this whole area of investigation is some sort of standardization. I think we have a lot of people who are out there attempting to help people, and I think this is a very good thing. Obviously, there's something going on. But I think if we somehow could come up with a standardized approach, I think that the quality of the data that we would then be able to glean from that would be, I think, consistent across the board. And that would give us opportunities to possibly learn about trends, about potential commonalities, I think, throughout the entire phenomenon. And I think one of the things that I was struck with Kevin's observation is that we really don't have a standardized approach. And I know, for instance, David and Bud have, their own personal approach in these things, and as do other abduction researchers out there. And I think perhaps with something a little bit more standardized, we might be able to actually identify trends. And so oftentimes I make a point of, really looking at not so much the answers that we're given, but it's the quality of the questions that we're asking to gain those answers. And I'm just wondering, have you guys attempted to really dovetail your efforts and come up with some sort of standardized approach? I'm assuming that you haven't.
Can I take that?
Yeah.
Dave Jacobs?
Sure.
And I'll let you have it, but I have been working on a book on how to do hypnosis with abductees. People who are regular hypnotists can't do it. People who are spiritualists can't do it. People who are in the New Age can't do it, and all that. It takes a special kind of training and a special kind of questioning, and it also takes knowledge of the abduction phenomenon itself. And I have a manuscript now that needs serious editing, but it's basically done. The problem is that I feel that the market for a book like this probably is in the tens and tens, so I'll almost certainly have to publish it myself. But I think it is extremely important to do something like that. This has been something that I've been thinking about for years and years and years. The problem is that it's pretty wild and woolly out there, and anybody and his cat can do hypnosis. Anybody can say the magical incantation and hypnotize somebody else if they want to be hypnotized. And then they can ask all sorts of questions that are meaningless or that lead people on or that fulfill an agenda of the hypnotist, and the results can be really, really awful and unworthy of evidence of anything other than the hypnotist's agenda. So there are very few competent people out there who know sort of what to do. In my book, The Threat, I addressed this issue sort of squarely and talked about the problems of incompetent hypnosis and mutually confirmatory fantasies that the person who's being hypnotized can do with the hypnotist himself, and so I'm very happy that you're thinking along the same lines, because this is, I think, is something that is needed. But
well, I completely agree. I have, of course, a standard way of working, but because of what I said about the issue of triage, that people are coming in that I deal with in various states of being emotionally collected and calm and everything. Very many people have a sense of distrust and so forth based on things that had happened in their life earlier when they told people about what was happening to them without even knowing that they were UFO connected. But they can often sound very crazy. So these people are not easily approached at the beginning in some standardized way. The sad thing is that what we're doing initially starts off without any doubt as a sort of de facto therapy. It has much more the quality of a therapist asking questions to find out the person's mental state and whether there's a safety net around them at home somehow, all those questions. But it takes a while to develop trust, wherein somebody might be able to ask a batch of questions that would seem very probing or perhaps irrelevant to the abductee, such as whether you're right-handed or left-handed. But I certainly agree that we've got to be more standardized in the way we approach things. And I'm going to be giving a talk this summer, a workshop at the MUFON conference on techniques of investigation of abduction cases. So it'll be a sort of an effort towards some kind of standardized form.
Picture this. You're on the phone with a client or colleague trying to explain something visual. A PowerPoint, a keynote presentation, a website. But it's frustrating because they can't see what you're talking about. The solution? Good news. They can if you invite them to an online meeting using GoToMeeting. Then they can see your computer desktop on their computer screen, so you can show them what you're talking about. I use GoToMeeting all the time to collaborate with colleagues and with clients. You can try GoToMeeting free for 30 days, but you must visit GoToMeeting/podcasts. That's GoToMeeting.com/podcasts for a free 30-day trial.
You're in the Paracast. You never know what's going to happen next.
We have our special guest host, Christopher O'Brien. This is the Paracast Ultimate Abduction Roundtable featuring Dr. David Jacobs, Kevin Randall, Bud Hopkins. Chris, you had a question.
One thing that's always kind of tweaked my curiosity, and that is that all you guys tend to have your own particular quality of cases, I think, that seem to be attracted to you and your work. And I'm wondering if you've ever really thought about why certain people contact you versus maybe contacting another abduction researcher, if there's any sort of rhyme or reason. I I seem to have this feeling that your particular work, as it evolves over the years, tends to be a magnet for certain quality of cases that are attracted to you. Do you guys want to address that?
Well, for me, they stumble upon my website oftentimes, or they've heard about me, or they saw one of my books or something like that, and they get in touch with me. And of course, I get people from around the world getting in touch with me all the time. I think it's random, personally, but I never, I will ask them sometimes, how did you find out about me? And they'll say, well, I just was going through the internet and I found your website and found your questionnaire and that sort of thing. So sometimes word of mouth, and that I will get people who know other people who are abductees here in the Delaware Valley where I live in Pennsylvania, and they will call me, and therefore it's not random because they know somebody. But I think in general, there might be people who go to New Age groups and search for some sort of relief from the odd experiences they were having in terms of getting some sort of intellectual control over it, and they will then engage in New Age therapists and hypnotists to try to find out what's with them and get New Age answers, and that would not be random, I would imagine. But for me, and I assume for Bud as well, it appears to be completely random.
Well, yes, I don't really think that there's much sort of unconscious or magical or whatever control which leads somebody to a particular therapist. I think proximity has a lot to do with it. People in the New York area contact me, obviously. When John Mack was active, I think the people in the Boston area came to him. It's very interesting that I've had several different people that I've worked with that John Mack also worked with, and essentially what was coming out was pretty much the same from no matter who was doing the hypnosis. It was the same situation, even though John was one of those who thought that people were attracted to different researchers for particular reasons having to do with ideology or whatever. But what I found was we were getting exactly the same thing happening and being reported, whether Dave was whether John was working with them or I was. And in one case in Istanbul, John and I did a joint session with a hypnotic session, but long interviews with a woman, a Turkish woman, and we got exactly the classic kind of thing that, for instance, I had gotten with Kathy Davis and just many women involving some sort of production of some odd-looking baby. They were being forced to hold it and so forth. It was exactly what I get all the time, and I think that John Mack wanted to feel that there were, I'd say, more benign agendas out there, and that people were coming to me simply because I had a particular agenda. I don't think that's true at all. I really don't. I think it is random, as Dave said.
Kevin, you had a response to any of this?
Well, John Mack had said a number of times, and it's reported in C.D.B. Bryant's book on the abduction conference held at MIT, that he found a strange matching between the abduction researchers and the abductees, and he wondered about that. And we wondered, and when I say we, Bill Cohn, Russ Estes, and I wondered if that might be indicative, and I say just indicative, that this proves nothing at all, that some of the belief of the researcher is communicated to the abductee. So there seems to be a more close matching between the abductee and the researcher than might be expected.
Well, I think my point being in asking that question is, you don't hear about cases, let's say, for instance, that Leo Sprinkle has dealt with over the years that fall outside of his particular I think, kind of built-in belief system around this whole subject. In other words, he's not getting, to my knowledge, he's not getting people that have horrific experiences and violations and hybridized babies and the types of things that possibly you would see more prevalent in Bud and David's work. I've always suspected and had a hunch that there is some sort of connection between the quality of your cases and the process that these people undergo to approach somebody for help. And I think that this could be a very important area for some sort of statistical analysis. In other words, I don't recall seeing very many cases from our two guests that, for instance, talk about Love and Light and Benevolent Space Brothers and how wonderful of an experience that these encounters are. There are cases out there where people, and I had a case myself that I did investigate pretty extensively. I'm no hypnotist by any stretch and didn't attempt to do that. This is a fully conscious series of events. But one of the things that I've noticed is that the more dire sounding cases tend to be attracted to certain types of researchers, whereas the opposite end of the spectrum seem to be attracted to others. Investigators. And what do you guys, have you noticed this at all? How many positive abduction cases, for instance, what would be the percentage of people that have wonderful experiences but want to know more about them? How many of these types of cases have been attracted to the two of you?
Well, the first thing that should be pointed out, again, UFO abductions are extremely complex events which have moments in which the whether this is induced or not, whether sometimes the abductee feels this incredible sense of love and bond with the abductor, and yet very often that changes as the case progresses to the fact that they have great anger and feel that this has been something that's been placed in their heads. I can understand easily how somebody might sort of luck into the investigator may luck into the beatific side of somebody's experience and just simply ignore the others and not even ask questions that would expand the context of what is being found out. We have to ask many questions, and I think that, first of all, Leo Sprinkle, who's a wonderful person, has a sort of unusual technique, and I remember sending a man who wanted contact with somebody who could help him, sending him to Leo, and he later reported to me that what had happened is that Leo, who's an excellent hypnotist, could not seem to get him into a hypnotic state, which I would suggest is an issue of trust. And he said, Leo then said, let's change places. I'll lie down on the couch, and you sit in my chair, and I will put myself into a trance state, and I will tell you what happened to you.
Ouch.
So, at that point, this man was rather disturbed about this. The basic message was that Leo came up with was that the aliens wanted him to go back to his home and show more love for the people who lived around him. Well, at that point, when we talk about getting what fits the person's agenda, I think Leo got what he wanted out of that. But I do think that these experiences are so complex that if you do it very lightly, you can easily tap into a particular aspect of the experience, which then can sort of, if you go by that as the only thing that really happens, it can warp your data.
So are you seeing that the lighter the approach, the deeper you get into a particular person's case, the more nefarious maybe it sounds, the more negative
No, actually, first of all, when we talk about negative and positive, my point has always been that one of the most confusing things to the abductee is that they do not end up thinking of the UFO occupants as being benign and friendly and helpful, or they don't see them as evil beings intent upon their destruction and so forth. It's the neutrality of the aliens' apparent behavior that is so upsetting to people because they don't know what to make of it. And that also, of course, allows room for the interpretation on the part of the abductee of what this is going to be about. If you're really, really hopeful, you might just focus on the hopeful side of it, and if you're somewhat paranoid, you might not. But the point is that these things have to be looked into in depth in a complex way.
Fate magazine provides true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. To receive your free issue of Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit their website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
This is the Paracast. You never know what's going to happen next.
This is an ultimate abduction roundtable on the Paracast. Christopher O'Brien is my co-host. We're featuring Bud Hopkins, Kevin Randall, Dr. David Jacobs. Notice that I vary the order of the names so nobody's ego is being offended.
Mine is anyway.
Okay, well, that's deliberate. Kevin, did you have a response before I drop something in?
Bud has reinforced what I have said by suggesting that some researchers do pull out of their abductees exactly what they want to hear. So, I mean, that point is made. So the question becomes, how prevalent is that throughout the entire abduction research community? And when we talk about that, we're not talking just about Bud Hopkins or Dr. Jacobs. We're talking about a lot of people, including Leo Sprinkle and Jim Harder, or we're talking about Jim Harder, or some of the other people out there doing abduction research. They seem to draw from their abductees what they expect to get. And John Carpenter was talking about as he and his assistant were doing hypnotic regressions on some of their clients, was saying, as they asked the questions, they knew what the answers were going to be. And so there seemed to be a suggestion there that there was an unconscious desire by Carpenter and an unconscious directing by Carpenter toward the answers he wanted to get, because they would sit there and say, yeah, we know what's going to happen next. And as the witness was talking about this, we were nodding and saying, yeah, we knew that was coming next. So in the totality of abduction research, we seem to see some of that sort of thing going on.
Well, let me just add to that unconsciously promoting thoughts in a person that are complex is something that would be a difficult thing to do. I've tried to do that with my wife, and I just can't seem to get that done. But
the problem is you do not have your wife in a hypnotic state. Are highly suggestible. And it's
we should probably ask her that.
Yeah. The situation is this, that hypnosis is not some sort of magical situation where a person is completely and totally in some sort of a trance, and they're Trilby and the hypnotist is Svengali, and anything that Svengali says they will do. It's not like that at all. A lot of people don't even know that they are in a relaxed and comfortable state. They look at me and they say, I don't think I'm hypnotized. And I say, it doesn't really matter. Lay back down. And in some ways it doesn't, and in some ways it does. We know that hypnosis it works. We know we learned recently that there are some brainwave changes in hypnosis. We don't exactly know why it works, but without it, we cannot get to the abduction phenomenon, because people will remember abductions. They'll remember bits and pieces of abductions, and it is a tool that is tricky. It's something that, as Chris says, needs standardization question of methodology for sure. But let me tell you a story. My basic question is the question that from all other questions is, what happens next? A woman came to me once who was an older woman, and she was heavily encased in New Age material. And that was fine. That was okay. And we started doing, we did 2 sessions. And the first session, this happened to her and that happened to her. And I like to start out in chronological order from the time before it happened to when it starts to happen. And what happens is the first thing that happens in the second, and so forth and so on. And so she talked about this, that, all the way to the end, and there was nothing that she told me that was particularly New Agey or spiritually enlightening or transformational or anything like that. And she was a little bit shaken because she had thought that this is what it was going to be. And she came back for another session, and the same thing happened. And I just do the same question that I do with everybody, which is a very, very, very non-agenda type questioning. And once again, she just came out with a sort of standard abduction event that anybody who does abduction hypnosis will come across. And then she wrote me a letter saying that she was stopping coming to me because she was not remembering the material that she wanted to remember.
Ouch.
She was just remembering stuff that had happened to her, not what she expected to remember. So her expectations were not realized, and I didn't particularly care what she was. I mean, if she remembers spiritual things, that's fine. That's good. I'm glad she's having it. That's fine. I don't have a stake in it necessarily, but she did. And yet she could not come out with what she was just remembering what happened, and that was that.
Yeah, and I would just add, that has happened to me a number of times, too, with people with originally very New Age beliefs.
Let me just raise, I think, the largest issue of all here, and this will go from part 1 to part 2, and that is the efficacy of using regression, hypnosis, to unearth details in abductions. Now, I realize there are lots of pros and cons here, and whoever wants to jump in, go ahead. But isn't there the danger here that maybe you're using a technology that hasn't been shown to reveal really accurate results? Who wants to take that?
Well, I can take that a little bit, and then I'll pass it off to Bud. When people come to me, most of them are acutely aware of several things. Number one, they don't want to be led. They know all about leading. They know that they're going to be vulnerable. They know that they're going to be suggestible. They don't want me to lead them. Number two, they don't want to be in a situation where they're unconsciously picking up things in popular culture and then parroting them back to me. They're aware of that also. Now, obviously, I don't want those things either. And in my hypnosis, I strive to avoid things like that. Obviously, I'm not interested in bad data. But hypnosis is. I think we all wish that we didn't have to use hypnosis. It's something that it can act as a gate, and for incompetent people, it can act as a barrier to finding out what's going on. I mean, it can act as an open gate rather. But the fact is that if there was full remembrance of everything that was happening to everybody, we would have no abduction phenomenon. The abduction phenomenon would not be a feasible event. But in fact, it is an event that takes place clandestinely, and we encounter people who remember odd things, who have lifetimes of odd events happening to them, and they in some way know that this is not the way it should be. They understand it in a lot of different ways. But for a large percentage of people who are abductees, they cannot connect it to the abduction phenomenon at all. Their unusual experiences, that is. They don't make that connection, and so we won't see them. And so we do see the ones that in some way know something is amiss here and shouldn't be happening the way it is, and they don't understand why it is that they will have these missing time situations, as Bud's first book was entitled, of 2 or 3 hours or even longer, and not know what happened to them, and nobody else knows what happened to them or sees them. And just to tell you a short story, I worked with a woman once. It's an extremely intelligent and articulate woman who years ago worked in New York City on 57th Street, I guess it was, as a laboratory assistant. And She had an hour for lunch, and she knew that she was going to go across the street and get a slice of pizza, and that would take about 15 minutes. And then for the next 45 minutes, she was going to do shopping. So she went, she got her slice of pizza, she walked out of the restaurant. The next thing she knows, it was 3 hours later. And she's in a building site. There's a hole in a lot with equipment, a crane, a digger, whatever, down at the bottom. And she's on a walkway around it with a fence. And she has to walk around this walkway, and then she gets out through the fence. There's a little opening there. And she's totally disoriented, doesn't know where she is. She gets back to her office, and her boss says, "Where have you been? My God, we thought you had been mugged or something. We were just about to call the police." And she went directly into her own office and called her physician and said, "I think I've just had a stroke." And that was, of course, the correct thing to do, because you're not going to have a period of 3 hours where you don't know where you are and you wake up somewhere else or you come to consciousness somewhere else.
Especially in Manhattan.
Right.
Well, you don't get a stroke in Manhattan just by getting around town every day and putting up with the hassles of that city.
Right. Well, the point was that she did have an MRI, and she went through with it, and there was, of course, nothing on the MRI. Everything was fine. She did not have a stroke. She doesn't have a brain tumor. She eventually came to me, and we found out sort of what had happened to her during that 3 hours. And we do it through hypnosis, because people have these experiences, and they'll think about them for 10, 20, 30 years sometimes. Some sort of triggering event, something that they remembered, as opposed to all the rest of them that they don't. And when they finally come to Bud or to me, and we look at them, it's resolved. So they understand, oh, I remember it now. Now I get it. That's what it is. And unfortunately, it's only hypnosis that does it. Now, there have been other attempts to try different techniques. There's holotropic breath work that John Mack used to do. Other researchers have done sort of a situation where you clap your hands 6 times or whatever it is. And there's EMT. There's EMD rather. There's all sorts of other treatments. But the best one is basically just getting somebody to relax, to focus, to sort of go back into the events of the time and start reporting them. Now, this does not say that they don't say things that aren't true. I found that does happen. And there is confabulation. And there are false memories. And that does happen. And it's up to me to try to separate it out and try to say, well, what this is, I think this is important and this isn't important. For example, there was a guy who came to me once, and when he was a little kid, now this is already, you're in a strange area here when you're like a 5-year-old or something like that. And he and his mother and his baby brother had gone out strawberry picking. Now, this was an event that he was in his 30s. He had thought about this consistently throughout his entire life. This was his triggering event, essentially. And we determined that he was in the back seat of the car, and they were driving. And instead of going strawberry picking, they went to an area where there was a big water tower, and they parked in a parking lot around it, and there was an object there. The next thing he knew, he and his mother and the baby were being lifted up into this object, and this happened to him, and that happened to him, this happened to him, and that happened to him, and then they brought him back down. He found himself back in the parking lot, and he looked at the street, which was right next to where they had come in, and he saw what was obviously a penny or something lying in the street. He ran out into the street to get the penny, and a pickup truck barreled down on him. It was actually at the rise of a hill, and jammed on his brakes and basically hit him. He went rolling down the street. His mother started screaming. The guy in the truck said, "My God, where did he come from?" And the next thing the kid knew was he was back on the object, and they were working on him, these beings, and they told him that they had to take him out of his body and put him in somebody else's body in order to repair him, in essence. And so they did that, and he told them, "Put me back in my body." He was anxious about that. "Put me back in my body." And anyway, eventually they did, and then they all returned back to the car and went home and forgot the entire event. And I told him, well, I thought that it's a very interesting. My sense, though, is that a kid who's 5 or 4 or whatever is not going to say, "Put me back in my body."
Yeah, I was going to say.
my sense is that a kid is going to say, I want to go home. Where's my mommy? I want my mommy. I want to go home. That's what a kid's going to say. And I'd never heard anything like that before. And so I told him that I just, we have to be very careful with that story. It doesn't match anything I've ever heard. And he was sort of huffy about it. He thought that was exactly what happened, but I didn't. And so I do think that there are things that the hypnotist has to be responsible in terms of hearing things that nobody else has ever said before, and it doesn't become evidence then. And when you do hypnosis, as Bud knows, and as all serious hypnotists know, you ask a series of questions that are calculated to find out whether a person is vulnerable and will be led and will indulge in confabulation and that sort of thing. And they're very subtle questions that have been worked out over the years. So it's not like we're just going in blind, believing everything that we hear.
You want to have a response to that, Kevin, before we split for the hour break?
What sort of response do you expect?
I want to know what you think about the process.
Of hypnotic regression?
Yes, sir.
I don't think it's a very, very good tool for investigation. I think it's too easy to lead people. I think that people have a real, they don't wish, but they are prone to please the operator, and even the most basic, benign question can suddenly lead somebody in a direction, and we can see that in lots of different arenas. We see it all the time, but you have to back everything up with some kind of concrete evidence. If we take a look at the satanic ritual abuse phenomenon that was prevalent in the 90s, we see an awful lot of people undergoing hypnotic regression and remembering these horrific memories of satanic ritual abuse, and yet no physical evidence ever surfaced to show that there were widespread satanic groups, cults out there committing all these sorts of crimes, and yet people are in jail for those sorts of things, even though the evidence did not support it, and a lot of the data was retrieved through various hypnotic regression techniques.
We'll return with the Paracast Abduction Roundtable. We have Christopher O'Brien as my co-host, Dr. David Jacobs, Kevin Randall, Bud Hopkins, more on the other side of the Paracast. Hey neighbors, would you like to see the Paracast live long and prosper? Well, if you know of anyone who wants to advertise their products or services on the Paracast, have them contact us directly. Tell them to write to sales@theparacast.com. That's sales@theparacast.com. And we'll also accept your donations by PayPal. Send your PayPal donation to the same address, sales@theparacast.com. That's sales@theparacast.com. And thanks for listening.
Welcome back to the Paracast.
We have the Ultimate Abduction Roundtable. Christopher O'Brien is my special guest co-host. We're featuring Kevin Randall, Dr. David Jacobs, and Bud Hopkins. And Kevin, before the hourly break, expressed concerns about the value of using hypnotic regression. Bud, your response?
Well, he used a very interesting example, the whole situation of the sort of fad for satanic ritual abuse, which we knew about quite some time ago. It came and went and did a tremendous amount of damage, and hypnosis was involved. But the interesting thing there is that when somebody comes to Dave or myself or another investigator, they're already assuming that they had some kind of weird experience they can't explain, as examples that have been mentioned already by Dave or me. So they know there's some problem. But with the ritual satanic abuse, people were going to therapists for some other kind of issue of self-esteem problems or whatever it was, and the therapist, who was the believer in the satanic cult idea, said, no, it isn't just a matter of what you say it is, a drinking problem or some mundane kind of emotional problem, but you were a victim of this whole kind of thing, or of incest, whatever. And the person would say no, and they would say it's because it really happened that you're fighting it so much, and they would eventually try to persuade the person that they had really been the victim when there was actually no recollection that the person had brought in to start with. And they'd put them under hypnosis and sort of more or less force them to come up with imagery. Now, that whole thing, of course, is totally reprehensible. And what eventually happens, we know, is that many of these people realized if they were accusing some member of their family of incest or whatever that never happened, and the families were sort of torn up, these people eventually turned on their therapist, realized the whole idea had been planted, and obviously, to get revenge and so forth, sued the therapist, and many therapists lost a lot of lawsuits on this or settled out of court. This is a case of what happens if somebody has an agenda and somebody is trying to be led into it. They had to force these people, really through many sessions sometimes, to come up with this material. And so eventually there were enormous problems, which somehow were attached to the process of hypnosis rather than to the forcing of an agenda, actually, by the therapist on the individual. My feeling here is that hypnosis is very much like just regular questioning. I don't really see the huge difference, except the person who has been hypnotized is in a very relaxed state. But you can lead somebody into some conclusion that it's a completely false one, just through normal conversation. The great thing about many defense lawyers and so forth is that they can take somebody who's they're trying to defend, they can ask questions of the accusing witness in such a way that they're forcing that person into a position where his whole idea of what had happened disappears. No hypnosis involved, but the idea of forcing false ideas into somebody's mind is something that is not limited to hypnosis. There are too many positive outcomes with hypnosis that actually establish for a fact that it works to have any kind of a blanket attack on it. So it's to me, it's unfortunate, as Dave said, that we have to use it, but it's one way to fill in the blanks in the person's experience, UFO experience.
It's a good thing we don't have any lawyers that are out there touting themselves as abduction researchers, I suppose. I couldn't resist.
Yep. Well, have there been any abduction researchers who maybe have taken somebody who believed they had been satanically ritually abused and changed their opinions into claiming they had been abducted?
Could I have that again, Kevin? It's a little hard to hear you.
Are there any abduction researchers who have taken people who maybe thought they had been satanic ritually abused and changed them into abductees?
Well, I don't know about changing them into abductees. The people who, I've never had anybody come to me thinking they had been victims of satanic abuse or anything like that. I have had people who had very odd experiences that they thought might have been incestuous experiences, where, as we looked into them, detail by detail, turned out to not be involved with anything incestuous, but actually they turned out to be an abduction experience, which, again, fitted other abduction experiences or other odd experiences that had all their life long.
I have a question.
So you're unfamiliar with that happening, and not necessarily to you or to Dr. Jacobs, but I'm thinking of a specific California researcher who did that.
It's a little, I'm sorry, Kevin, would you go over? It's a little hard to hear you. You're thinking of a Californian situation?
There's a researcher in California who lost his life because people had come to him seriously believing they'd been satanically ritually abused, and he guided them into beliefs in alien abduction.
Oh, yeah, well,
using hypnosis, and when somebody said, well, I can't get anything, they said, well, make it up. So I'm not suggesting that you guys engage in that. I'm suggesting that when we're looking at the totality of alien abduction research, we're getting an awful lot of stuff in there that is contaminated by all this other stuff. Well, when I try to make points, I get shouted down.
Yeah, well, I think that's another reason, as Dave and Chris have suggested, that we should have this far more standardized than it is to avoid that. One of the basic methods that I use, and I hesitate ever to talk about this because it's too useful, but at any rate, when a person's very relaxed and I'm asking a question, often the question is what's happening now, or whatever, something very neutral. But often I will slip in a false lead, and I don't want to explain anything more about that, except that in one case, the little boy, this is just a conversation, didn't involve hypnosis, but he had been telling me about these little people in the room, and this is part of a very long, complex family story too, that he was taken out of his bed and he was flooded up to the beam of light, and he went into this round thing and so forth, and it was sounding, and he was very frightened. It sounded very much like a real abduction, of course, but at any rate, he said he went into this room, and I said, well, this round space, where there was a table, and I said, well, stop right here. This is very, very important. I have a very important question. When they take you into that room, they always give you something to eat first. Now, what did they give you? Of course, they don't give anybody anything to eat. And this little child looked very perplexed. This is just normal conversation, and looked very sad. And he said, well, they didn't give me anything to eat, which was, of course, a very nice little test that I was not getting just a simple invented child story.
Well, that brings up a point that I wanted to make, and that is I've been listening to this, and one of the things that I've always wondered is how come there are not reports of people needing to use the lavatory while they've been gone for X amount of time. The first thing that happens to me in the morning when I wake up is I got to go to the bathroom, and I don't. Have you guys ever thought about that? I mean, is this what are your thoughts on that?
There has one woman was abducted, and she told them that she had to urinate. And they just said, no, don't worry about it. It's okay. And she just urinated in the hallway. And
so the aliens don't have bathrooms.
No.
Well, not that I've ever seen. But she looked back and she saw somebody cleaning up the urine. But that does happen, and what happens more is that they're abducted. Let's just say if it is at night, and they're not wearing their glasses, and they'll complain. Well, I don't have my glasses on, so it's hard for me to see. And in dream material, it's not hard for anybody to see anything. But this is one of this is a problem that I run into far more often.
I had a case, Dave, where a woman, remembering this as a little girl, she had been taken along with her little sister, who was something like 2 or 3, and when she was in the craft, and of course she was totally frightened, so was her little sister, and she said that she looked over and was very embarrassed because her little sister was urinating on the floor. So we do have cases like that, but we don't know what happens in something like this Travis Walton case of 5 days. But it's just
I did investigate a case that was 5 days, and the woman indicated that they used a catheter on her and just pressed on her abdomen, I guess, and she was able to urinate that way.
So the aliens, therefore, do not have a standard bathroom or biological waste system, perhaps.
Is there a secret UFO agenda? Do strange creatures from the darkest corners of the mind roam the Earth? Is there evidence for mind control, time travel, or devious government conspiracies? Find out the inside scoop on the latest conspiracies, paranormal activity, and Fortean phenomena when you subscribe to Tim Beckley's Conspiracy Journal. It's jam-packed with stories, special book and DVD promotions, and the best news, it's absolutely free, sent right to your mailbox. Plus, a bonus free email newsletter sent out every Friday. Simply send an email with your name and address to MrUFO@webtv.net. That's MrUFO@webtv.net. Find out what they don't want you to know.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
Bud Hopkins, Kevin Randall, Dr. David Jacobs joining us for an ultimate abduction roundtable. Christopher O'Brien is my co-host, and we're exploring a lot of the implications here. Now, one of the things that comes out of left field here is the fact that we tend to take what they say at face value. These must be aliens, maybe we have hybrids, etc. But when you read books from Jacques Vallée and others, you get the impression that when we encounter other intelligences, there's a lot of deception involved. Why should we, Dr. David Jacobs, assume that what they're telling us is a literal truth?
Well, now, Bud and I are going to differ a little bit on the situation.
Feel free. We can allow you both, by the way. We can allow you both if you want to disagree. That's what it's all about. Go ahead.
Well, are you saying why do we take abductee material at face value, or why do we take what aliens say at face value?
Why do we take any of that at face value? How do we know it's not all deception of one sort or another?
Right. Well, for me, there are certain areas of confabulation that I'm very, very careful about. Number one is a description of aliens and what they look like. And this happens particularly in the early sessions. But the number two area of confabulation is recounting alien dialogue. The problem here is if all communication, as everybody reports, is telepathic between aliens and humans. And I say, well, what do you mean by telepathic? What's your sense of that? And they say, well, I get an impression in my mind which converts it to words, and I know I have to get up on the table. Well, the problem then is what prevents a person from getting an impression in their mind from their own thoughts, confusing it as coming from outside of their mind, and then telling me that is what the aliens told him or her? And the answer is nothing. Nothing prevents that at all, and people will, in fact, do that, especially in early sessions, I found anyway. So that's a red flag area when they tell me what the alien said to them, unless it's something like get up on the table or we're not going to hurt you, or stuff that we hear constantly and all the time. And but if it's the wisdom of the universe or their plans for what they're going to do with humans or something like that, I wait for confirming data. I put that on the back burner. I'm very, 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 very wary of that, and I'm very careful about that because people can't be believed at all times. As I said before, they will confabulate. They will say things that are not true, and it's up to the competent hypnotist to understand that and to be able to say, well, this is not quite evidence yet until other people, preferably lots of more people, say exactly the same thing.
But even then, how do we know it isn't all some form of deception? That the aliens, whatever force is behind these things, how do we know that this isn't just some kind of message they want to deliver to make people think this is what's happening, but we have no way of knowing the underlying truth, do we?
Right. Well, from what I found, Alan, and most of the gray aliens don't do an awful lot of talking. And when they do, it's not very substantive. They're very, very, I'm going to say closed mouth, but even the word mouth probably doesn't apply. But they're not forthcoming about what they're doing.
Sure, but how do we know they're even gray aliens? How do we know that even that is a real thing?
Well, what you're looking at, of course, is the preponderance of evidence over a long period of time. Now, you have to understand that Bud and I know that there's a strong physicality involved with these abduction events. People are physically missing from their normal environments when they're abducted. People are abducted in groups. People return wearing other people's clothes, wearing them without their own clothes, with unusual marks and scars, and even broken bones in their body. and they don't know how they got it. And believe me, if suddenly you had a broken arm, I think you'd remember how you got it. But this is not the case with abductees. And then there's a lot of other physical aspects to it as well, including witnesses seeing other people being abducted and may or may not be abducted themselves. So against this background of physicality, there are these experiences, and when people recount their experiences, they recount them in really extraordinary detail. Not always, but oftentimes in extraordinary detail, down in precise detail, down to what instruments are used and how they hold this and how they do that and what's happening now. And they do that across all abductees. In other words, they all say the same thing. If this were psychological, that physicality, of course, would not be there at all.
Okay, but I'm not talking psychological, David.
No.
Maybe you're not catching where I'm going with this. I'm saying... Go ahead, Bud.
Well, I'm trying to say that.
I was going to say, what I think you're really saying is people describe seeing gray aliens with big black eyes, and maybe they're actually huge green aliens with one eye in the middle of their forehead or something like that. There's something behind the imagery that we're shown, that they're really not in a UFO, they're on Mars or something.
Or they might be on Earth, they might be in the center of the Earth with their telegrays. What are they?
Exactly. So, I think that's the kind of philosophical question that really can't be answered in any particular way, because you can say that, move from the experience, the abduction experience, to UFOs themselves. Maybe they don't look like that. Maybe they're made to, in some way, we are made to see them as round or triangular or whatever it is, and they're really something completely different.
Or they're manipulating us. Let me follow up with this, Bob. Or if you look at the image in the movie Contact, where the alien came to the Jodie Foster character in the form of her father, because that was the way she'd understand and accept.
Yes, right.
That's a deliberate effort. They are deliberately tailoring what they look like to what we expect to see. And we are now expect to see gray aliens. Maybe in the 1950s we expected to see the Klaatu character with the silvery uniform from Dave the Earth Stood Still, as George Adamski did. Maybe in the 15th century it was leprechauns.
Well, some of these questions are impossible to answer, especially when you get into historical situations. But the point is that if it starts somewhere, if the gray aliens are seen someplace and then they're seen again, and then they're seen again, I guess you could say, well, behind the gray aliens is another different alien form or something, or whatever, that they're just projecting that image now. The same way that we know that they can do screen memories and make a child think it's Bugs Bunny in the room there with them, or somebody can see a huge owl or whatever. We know they can do that sort of thing. But is there any kind of rock bottom imagery behind that is the real image? And there's no way to answer that question.
Right. Yeah. The point is that this is the evidence we have, and it's consistent, and it goes. It's all the time. It does not change over time. We haven't seen it change over the decades because of popular culture or something like that. Obviously, if that were the case, we would be reporting that, but that is not what we see, not what we hear.
Are you correct about that, David? What if you go back a few hundred years where they were seeing beings that seem to be more reflective of that society? I mean, since Barney and Betty Hill, we expect to see aliens, don't we?
Well, but Barney and Betty Hill were already a long time ago, and half century ago, or whatever, and consequently, you'd think that there would be change over that half century. And the answer is,
no, because we have Close Encounters, we have E.T. Chris, you had a question about this?
Yeah, there's a few things that really come up in this regard, but one of the things that I've been interested in finding out more from both of you is, do you think that there's a possibility that there's some sort of in the words of Stephen Greer, some sort of governmental or military industrial complex conspiracy that may be behind a portion of these cases? And if so, is there any way to really determine? I'm kind of taking I'm applying Gene's question here a little bit.
You're allowed.
Yeah. I had a very interesting case of a gentleman who claimed that he was part of a military team that was going out in the Midwest in the early to mid-'70s and performing what could be described as classic alien abductions with the help of some sort of psychological warfare techniques. Have either of you, in the many hundreds of cases that obviously that over the last 20 plus years that you've been involved with, have either of you seen any sort of indication that we may be dealing with some sort of sleight of hand on the fact of some sort of human agency?
Well, I'll just try to answer this very quickly. I've never run into anything that would suggest a sort of a mock abduction scene that was somehow constructed. But I have.
How about Barney and Betty Hill? I think that has indications of possibly being a mock event.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to go back arguing about the Hill case. I'd rather stay with things from my own experience.
Sure.
But this is an important thing. I definitely have found instances where there seemed to be some sort of interest in certain abductees that would suggest a governmental branch doing some kind of black ops for some reason, trying to, in the case of Kathy Davis, trying to, I suppose, retrieve an implant or some such thing, that she remembers this thing and consciously, and it seems like there's nothing involving a UFO or it took place with normal humans in a normal, somewhat hospital-like place and so forth. I've heard a couple of things like that. That's very rare, but it wasn't a mock abduction, really. It was maybe a literal abduction of the earthly sort. But again, there are many cases where there seem to be people who have been in the military, in the branches of service, who have had abduction experiences, who then were interviewed later by military psychiatrists and so on, and apparently drugged, at least 3 cases that I've worked with, and then seemingly get put through some kind of some process to scramble the memories and scramble the brains, so that what comes out, what they talk about the next day, isn't making any sense, really. But I definitely think there's an effort there. Now, Dave and I disagree on this very strongly, that there's some sort of branch of the government or the military, or whatever you want to say, that takes care of these issues sometimes. But I think that the evidence that I've run into is very persuasive.
David, your response.
Right. Well, I have not run into that kind of evidence, and I have run into people who think that they've been abducted by the military, and I've looked at those cases, and each time they realized that it wasn't really the military they thought it was, and they remembered it as being, but then they realized no, it wasn't. So what I've often said is that I hope I'm wrong. I hope that the military can abduct people, for example, like Bin Laden or whatever.
I think if they abduct him, they're going to take a gun and say, "Go ahead, make my day," and shoot him.
Yeah, I think it'd be a little bit more than some sort of probing going on with that guy.
Well, they might do the probing, then kill him.
It certainly would be the end to wars. It would that kind of power to abduct people from the government. It would be and not have anybody see it or know it would be the ultimate sort of power. And if anybody gets it, I would hope it's our government and not anybody else's government. But in other words, I don't have any stake in it one way or the other. But I have not seen evidence for it myself.
Hi, This is Tamar from Namecheap. We're a domain name and web hosting company, and we really care about our customers. With domain name purchases, Namecheap offers free SSL and free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers. We won't bother you with unwanted messaging in your inbox or upon checkout, but most importantly, we care about you, our customers. Your satisfaction and happiness is our primary focus because your support means so much to us. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at radio.namecheap.com for web hosting and domain name specials. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Namecheap, where we host many great contests, or become a fan of ours on Facebook at facebook.com/Namecheap. See you online.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We have Dr. David Jacobs, Kevin Randall, Bud Hopkins. Special co-host is Christopher O'Brien. Kevin, now that we're into the government equation, what's your feeling about all that? Do you think that some of this stuff may have been staged by the government?
No, that's the short answer, no.
Let's have the long one.
It logically makes no sense. The government, the military certainly doesn't have that kind of power to influence that sort of thing, although we have any number of people who suggest that, starting out with Warren from the Endlesham case, claiming all sorts of things that the government did to him during his 8 months of military service. I just do not see anything to suggest that whatsoever.
According to Stephen Greer, he's the one that just keeps popping into mind with this particular aspect of the questions. He seems to think that all abductions are being done by the government. I think that's rather ridiculous assertion myself, but he would reflect, I think, one side of the benevolent Space Brothers equation that would then try to, in some way, shape, or form, put all negative abductions into some sort of a boogeyman military government context in order to, to have that benevolent Space Brother type scenario, I guess, be, something that he could really, really get behind and push. Another thing that's always kind of puzzled me about this whole phenomenon is the apparent level of technology in terms of the state of the art. Oftentimes I encounter in reading some of these accounts levels of technology, medical technology, that's behind where we are in terms of our state of the art. Have either of you noticed any sort of trending in terms of the types of procedures that are being performed, the types of equipment that's being used? Are we seeing any sort of progression in possibly a level of technology or agenda? I know, David, you've really honed in on this whole idea of hybridization, and that they're getting ready to place hybrid, now I guess you would say grown or almost fully grown hybrids into the culture. Has this been something that has evolved over time, for instance? Have we seen any sort of progression in terms of the level of technology? Something about this whole thing medically, in terms of the actual procedures that are being performed, does not make sense, at least to me.
Well, first of all, there has been a progression, and of course, you hit on it for me. The change over time that I have seen most is the number of is the importance of the hybrids within the abduction scenario. In terms of technology or medical procedures, that I have not seen. But what you're looking at is very advanced types of procedures that are going on. In other words, how they can examine a person just by touching them with their fingers is something that we cannot understand. And every single machine that's ever been used on an abductee, we have no knowledge of whatsoever. I think I was only able, for years, I was only able to identify one aspect of a medical procedure, and that was they would take an instrument and run it across a person's foot, and the foot would flex. And that would be a reflex test of some sort. And then another point, I was reading a book on neurological examinations, because that's what I do for fun, And
it sounds exciting.
I realized.
I bet the endings are really fascinating.
I just can't wait to get to the end. Yep. I realized when reading this that a procedure that was puzzling for years and years, that even Barney Hill said, where these beings would take their finger and thumb and run it down his backbone, his vertebrae, from the neck down to the coccyx and back up again. I could never understand what that was, and I realized that it wasn't a bone examination. It's my theory, anyway. It wasn't a bone examination. It wasn't a growth examination for kids or anything like that. But basically, it was a neurological examination, and they were in some way dealing with the nerves, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, I guess, that runs down the backbone. And those are the only, that one I think I'm right about, reflex. The other one I hope I'm right about, but it's a good theory. And all the rest we just don't know, because they don't tell us what it is. And if you ask abductees, what is that machine for, you're asking them to sort of guess. You're saying, they'll say, well, it's taking a look at it's like an X-ray machine. It's looking at my ribs. And the answer is that they don't really know what it is.
But we're still assuming here that these are physical events with physical creatures doing physical things, and we don't know what's really going on under the surface. Maybe there are no machines. Maybe it's all generated as some kind of hallucination caused by an external source. But the one thing I wanted to focus on, David, and obviously we can't answer that today, your feeling about hybridization. So you feel that the aliens, or whatever they are, want to create beings that are part us and part them, aside from the genetic complications. For what purpose?
Well, we don't know the ultimate purpose. That's something that we don't know. And once again, if this were psychological, we would know the ultimate purpose. People would just make it up as long as they make up everything else. But we don't know what the ultimate purpose is. But what these beings say, and what hybrids say, and what everybody else tells me, and have been for years and years, is that this is a program whereby ultimately everybody will be together here, and everybody will be happy, and it's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be great. And people have seen scenes of and I've mentioned this particular scene oftentimes because it's so reflective of it. For example, a picnic where people are standing around a grill, where they're talking, where they're playing ball, and this and that, and then grassy area and all that, and the person will look at this sort of screen-like device on the wall, and they'll say, "Can you tell the difference between you and us?" And the person says, "Well, no. What do you mean, tell the difference? Everybody's the same."
Well, isn't that a way of taking us over then? I mean, we're giving this paradise image, saying, you know what, if we develop these hybrid beings and they take over, the aliens will be in control. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, it doesn't sound good to me, I must say. The problem here is that if this is a neurologically based manipulation, they can control our ability to think, to see things, and we can't control them. And that makes us not just second-class citizens, but a kind of second-class species almost. So it's sort of frightening, and I don't like to hear these things, and I've done tests in hypnosis telling people, now, I don't want you to tell me anything bad. Don't tell me anything I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear anything about this, that, or the other thing. Just don't tell it to me. And then I'll do an induction, and then they go ahead and they couldn't care less what I told them. They just tell me the same thing that has always happened to them, and I have not been able to prove that these are in some way just coming out of their own imaginations and not what they're actually seeing.
What about the ubiquity, though, David? The fact that so many people are having this kind of experience. I mean, obviously, if we look at alien logic, let's look at the physical explanation. The aliens come here, they want to find out more about us. They take a few genetic samples. We'll have male, female, left-handed, right-handed, black, white, Asian, whatever. How many samples they need to take?
Right. This is a model, the experimental model that we derived actually from some of the early cases by Betty Hill and Antonio Villas-Boas to a certain extent, and some of the other ones from the 1970s. I have found that this experimental model, the model that suggests that it's a study that they're learning about us, that the evidence just wasn't there over the long haul for that it was much more than that. I mean, how many times do they have to take a person to find out whether if they poke him with a needle, he's going to feel pain,
Right.
And so I found that for me it did not hold. And what I found was something that was much more consistent with a program. And as a program, they had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was goal directed. And that's where the hybrids, began to intrude themselves more and more into people's accounts as I realized, well, this cannot be a study. It doesn't make any sense as a study. However, even now, most abduction researchers still use the word experiment. They're experimenting on us. It's very difficult to sort of to shake free of those statements. But I just didn't find the evidence for it.
What have you seen, Kevin, in the studies you've done about all this?
What it seemed to me, and you touched on it briefly, was that the experimentation being conducted by the aliens seemed to be very backward. They are able to travel interstellar distances. They have defeated that tremendous technological problem that we have not yet been able to defeat. They can travel these interstellar distances. They can get here, and yet their genetic experimentation is backward. It doesn't seem to advance. They're doing the same thing today they did 10 years ago. And I think, Gene or Chris, I don't remember who pointed it out, that how many genetic samples do they need? If they're collecting DNA, why not just abduct the hair behind the barber shop and collect the DNA that way? Why are they doing it in such an invasive manner? And if...
Well, it's theatrical, too. There seems to be an element of theater involved there.
Yes, an element of theater. But if they have the capability of doing these sorts of things, how is it they're incapable of totally erasing the memories of the abduction? That even somebody with very little training in hypnosis is able to break through the hypnotic blocks erected by the aliens. Why are they unable to completely erase the memories? Something that our technology allows us to do. Completely erase memories.
So basically the screen memory may be the entire abduction.
Pardon me?
The screen memory may not just be a surface memory of something like an owl preceding an abduction, but the entire abduction itself may be a screen memory of some sort.
Why not erase the entire episode from the mind of the abductee?
Kevin,
they have the capability of doing that. Why do they? And they've been studying us for 50 years, 60 years, 150 years. They should have been able to develop that capability by now, and yet they seem incapable of doing it.
Well, Kevin, one of the most basic problems in the whole thing is to go right back to the beginning and say, why is it that UFOs are seen sometimes, and sometimes they may register on radar, but they're not seen? They can seemingly be invisible some of the time and highly visible some other time. So why is that? Why don't they stay invisible the whole time or whatever? I mean, there are many, many problems.
Well, you know what? You raise a point here, Bud, and I want to throw something out here. The area of theatricality, that a lot of the UFO sightings may be strictly a show for us to see. It could be a diversion for what's really going on. I don't know. A show. They make the decision to either be tracked or not. They make the decision to be seen or not.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the huge problems in the whole thing. This is why, again, as Dave would put it, it doesn't sound like it's made up, because if it's made up by people, there are going to be clear answers and clear reasons for everything. But one quick thing I'd like to say about why there might be lots of abductions. And this is, after they've already got the program going, why are they continuing it? I just was working with somebody whose grandchild seems to have been abducted, very small, within the past year. Anyway, the thing here, this thought has passed my mind. There seems to be a very strong alien interest in human emotions, and they seem to set up, as we've described many times, sort of these little scenarios inside the craft where the abductee is put through some kind of problem, puzzle, fear, whatever, and the aliens seem to be observing that person as if they're so to speak, picking up those emotions, and perhaps they're learning the emotions from what they can learn from that individual. And it's then possible that an individual alien, whatever we want to call them, is in the situation of a child trying to learn how to ride a bike. There's no way to learn how to ride a bike that you can be told through instruction. It's just a very simple thing that the body has to pick up the kind of balance that's necessary to make the bike go and not fall over. And so it may be that individual occupants of UFOs have to each one by one, pick up a range of human emotions from the abductees that they're picking up. It's possible that might explain some of the vast numbers that are involved here, which I admit is a huge problem to the whole thing. Why so many?
For 58 years, Fate has provided true reports of the strange and unknown. Fate brings you the latest in all aspects of the paranormal, like angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, and much, much more. To receive your complimentary Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit their website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We have an Ultimate Abduction Roundtable on the Paracast featuring Bud Hopkins, Kevin Randall, Dr. David Jacobs. Our guest co-host is Christopher O'Brien, who is champing at the bit with a comment.
I am indeed.
I hear it now, the sound of champing.
Chomp, chomp, chomp. You know, one of the things that I've kind of prided myself in my investigative work out in the field is coming up with new and creative out-of-the-box ways of attempting to gain better quality data. And one of the things that's always puzzled me about the abduction research is how come nobody has come up with a way to somehow gauge the types of experiences that are going on ahead of time. We know of many cases where there's a pattern of abduction that's maybe not predictable in terms of the actual night that it's going to occur, but it seems that there's an opportunity, a window of opportunity here for us to, for instance, W.C. Levengood came up with an idea of putting curlers in an abductee's hair, and putting unsprouted seeds in the curlers to try to analyze the types of energies that obviously, if this is a real phenomenon, there's got to be some exotic types of energies that are being utilized, and to put ungerminated seeds into small curlers in someone's hair, then you can then analyze the seeds once the person has come back. How come nobody ever grabs anything aboard a ship? How come we don't have any sort of physical evidence that has been acquired by abductees? We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases, and to my knowledge, there's never been a person that's been able to grab something or come back with some irrefutable evidence that they actually were taken somewhere. Who would like to take that one?
Well, I can start and give it over to Bud. First of all, when people are taken aboard the object, their clothes are removed. So if they're going to find something and hide it, there's only a few places, almost unthinkable, where they can hide it. And they're under mental control. It doesn't even occur to them usually to take anything. It's not like they have consciousness of the fact that they're being abducted and they've got to find proof. This is a situation that's been happening to them for years and years, and their senses are blunted in essence. Having said that, I did try various experiments early on with this phenomenon, and one of them was putting a radiation badge in a person's nightgown. and nobody would know the difference. And this was one that I subscribed to a service where they would read it, and we measured the background radiation. I mean, we knew where the background radiation where she lived was, so that they would see if there was any radiation on board the object. And she was abducted, came back with the radiation badge, and I sent it to this outfit in Rochester, New York, for a reading. We know that there probably isn't any radiation, but this would sort of confirm that. And I waited and waited and waited, and I didn't hear anything, and I finally started calling, and I couldn't get an answer, and then finally I got the answer. The company had gone out of business, taken my radiation badge with them, and that was the last I ever heard of it. But these are areas that...
Dr. Jacobs, let me interject one thing here. Bravo to you for doing that, attempting to gather some physical evidence that way. That's the kind of thing that I've always been talking about. We need to think of these sorts of things so we can gather the sort of evidence that we need. So bravo for you for giving that a try. But
yeah,
the question
I agree.
I would have is, how come we have no videotape?
Well, videotapes is the first thing I ever tried, and I've had many people sleeping underneath a video camera. And the problem with that...
I'm thinking about all the video cameras out there now, today. All the videotape, we've got wonderful videotapes of meteorite falls. On my blog, I actually have, I put a video bar on there that has meteor falls on it, so you can watch these things. We've got security cameras all over the place. We've got police cars with cameras in them. We still don't have any videotape. Right.
This is a very promising area of research, actually, and I would like to do something like that. What you need to do is you have to have a videotape trained on a person's residence, and see if anything unusual happens in that way. Now, of course, there would be no abduction phenomenon if this phenomenon did not take place clandestinely. And when people, let's say they're abducted, they'll go, as Bud and I know, right through walls and ceilings and windows and so forth. And the problem is that people on the outside don't see that. Now, maybe they're cloaked, maybe people are made to turn away, or maybe they're just not seeable. That's the tack that I take, that they're just invisible in that particular period because they're going right through a solid object, which makes no sense whatsoever. And once again, if this were psychological, people would just say they wanted to walk through they went into the door, opened the door, and walked out. You know what I mean? Because they wouldn't have to put these roadblocks to believability in front of them by saying they went through a closed wall or window. But anyway, that is something that really needs, that's a very promising area, and I would like to see that. I'd like to see cameras trained on homes and apartments, not just on streets and on businesses, which is where the majority of cameras obviously are. And maybe we can pick up something that way, and we'd have to target certain people who are abductees, and we'd have to set up a camera somewhere, somehow. But I think this is doable. And I would definitely like to have this happen. This is good. You know, the problem is that you have to remember, doing abduction work is, for Bud and for me, all the money comes directly out of our pockets. And for transcripts and things like that, every time a person comes into my house, it costs me a pretty penny. Neither of us charge anything. We don't have a large staff of people around us who are willing to perform tasks. We have no funding from any institution or anything like that. In fact, as an academic, if you do this work, it's not a good career move, as I tell graduate students who are interested in this. They want to stay as far away from this as humanly possible if you ever want to get a job in academics. So we're at a great disadvantage, and the more help that we can get, the better it is. And there's an awful lot of smart people out there who can put their minds together and figure out ways to detect this that I don't know yet. And I'm a great believer in that. Absolutely.
Let me ask you a left field question that occurred to me about the hypnotic regression. Does it always have to be done in person? Can you do this on the phone, or have you ever done it on the phone?
Yes. There's an awful lot of people out there who don't live who live 1,000 miles away from me and all that. And I have done phone hypnosis with people who I have worked with and who've moved away. And I used to think to myself, gosh, I'm doing this on the phone. People will think I'm completely crazy, until I realized that there's a huge psychology of phone hypnosis, phone therapy world out there just for that reason, that people can't get to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And so I was comforted by that. The only person who I never met who was this woman who's been stalking me, unfortunately, and that was a mistake, and that became a major problem. Every other person I've had sessions with first, and then they would move away, and I would still have some sessions on the phone. Now, the sessions aren't quite as good, and they're not as thorough, but they're satisfactory for the person who's remembering the experience.
I want to ask one question since you brought it up without going into detail. The woman who's kind of stalking you or going after you, that person has released tapes of these sessions. Are you aware as to whether they've been edited, that you're actually hearing them, or have you even bothered to hear them?
You know, they can't, they have to have been edited because my hypnosis sessions with her lasted from 3 to 4 hours. So I don't know how she can do that. I have not gone through everything. It's too hard for me. The sections that I have heard have been edited, and I have not been able to go through all her material, one piece at a time. But my sense has been obviously that it's been very heavily edited, and that everything she has done is tries to put me in a very bad light, and it's just a shame. As I was saying before, it's been a very, very painful situation for me, and I don't know when it's going to end. I have a feeling I'm in for the long haul with her, maybe even for the rest of my life, actually. So I think that people should realize, though, that there is another and very, very different side to the story that you're not hearing from her.
Okay, looking at abduction research as a totality, Kevin Randall, in the next few minutes, can you tell us where you think the best approach could be taken to learn more about what's going on?
I think we need to, as you say, look at the totality, not only understand that the people coming to Bud and Dr. Jacobs are suffering, and they clearly are, but look at the things that we might be able to do to learn more about the abductions, and it may be simple things as gathering statistical information. We need to take a look at the possibilities of the videotape, because everything is videotaped today. There are cameras everywhere, and they're not just pointed at the streets, but they're pointed all over the place, so that if something happens in a city, you probably got 3 or 4 different views of it.
That's what we see on Law & Order, by the way. They always have the cameras which show the crime in progress.
Right where you need them.
How about the 27 cameras on the Pentagon during 9/11?
But we need to look at all the avenues available to us for research. We need to gather some good, solid physical evidence. We have to understand that hypnosis is not a pathway to the truth that people can confabulate under hypnosis. There is a phenomenon known as pleasing the operator, where you can subtly lead somebody under hypnosis, no matter how carefully you are to avoid that. But we have to look at all of those sorts of things, and we have to move abduction research from case studies, and that's speaking as a researcher and not a therapist, but move it from case studies into an arena where we can gather some solid physical evidence and find out exactly what is going on.
Bud Hopkins, what do you have to say about the future direction of abduction research?
Well, one quick thing about the videotape. The question of these things being seeable, these events, abductions, being seeable or not, whether they're invisible. One of the most important things about the Linda Cotila case is that this was one instance in which apparently the aliens were showing off and let everybody see what they were doing at 3 a.m. in Manhattan, and many people saw what they were doing and saw people floating in the air going up into the craft. So I've dealt with witnesses to that event, even though it lasted about a minute and a half, something like that. So we know what these things would look like if they were seeable. They're usually not seeable, and that's the point. It's the reason why we don't have videotapes of people floating up to UFOs. So we might have a real problem making that the omnipresent video systems work. But the point is, as Kevin said, hypnosis is not a reliable path to the truth. Neither is just sitting down and having an interview with somebody under normal circumstances where each one has a cup of coffee in hand. That isn't necessarily a path to truth either. In every case, a person can confabulate or be mixed up or be telling the truth, whether they're under hypnosis or not under hypnosis. So we have to use every possible method, and I agree